G'day and welcome to Not Q&A. This is a production of The Good Source and we're giving a whole lot a new try tonight. And welcome to Lyle.
Thanks very much, Dave. Good to be here with you.
Now, one of the things I have to ask you, the viewers, if you're watching, first people in, you get to be our guinea pigs. We've been having some problems with the sound tonight and we're hearing some echoes in some places and not in some others. Can you please type in the comments right now if you can hear some really bad echo at all as I talk to you? I'll bring in some of our guests as well because we just need to test this sound really before we presume we're doing a really great show for half an hour that nobody can bear to listen to. So first of all, welcome to Damien Curry. How are you?
Very good. How are you?
I'm doing very well indeed as well. Let's also bring in Ray. There we go. We've got all three of you. And Jono, on this vertical slide, might need to go to a close-up of either me or Lyle in the studio if we can make that work. Actually, guys, just forgive us. We're sorting out so much with this first new show and new format. But again, if you can hear echoes from us at all, it'd be great to solve that and get that sorted. So please leave a comment in the comments if the audio is working fine or if there's a really bad echo. Damien, to start us off with, why don't you tell us a little bit about Ray, who is a long-time special guest on your awesome podcast every week.
Ray is somebody that I've known for many years. I've worked with for many years. Ray appears on The Other Side Australia as our, or has appeared on The Other Side Australia as our regular on North America, our man on North America. So people who listen to The Other Side Australia or now watch The Other Side Australia would know Ray from his comments on the show. Ray helped us get through the election very well, keeping us informed and keeping us across everything. He's a keen viewer of and consumer of the sort of more conservative alternative media in the United States. So I guess it sort of saves me having to wade through it to just chat to Ray and pick his brains. But he's also a communications expert and an issues management expert and trainer working for clients internationally. And he can fill in anything that I've left out there, Ray.
You're
Canadian. That's the other thing.
And greetings from Hong Kong. That's right.
Very good.
That's
and
right. I think that we've been
analyzing
from a kind of media messaging standpoint, as well as looking at how these things unfold when from a political and strategic context. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I think.
Okay, and just a little note for our production guys who are so generously volunteering tonight. If you need to get a message to me, the way to do it is through the private chat in the StreamYard function there. And thanks for the feedback that there's like some echo initially with Damien, but all sorting out as it goes on. So we'll keep listening to that. Barbara is saying we've got some big echo there too. We'll keep trying that. Guys, panelists, if you could just go into your cam mic settings and make sure that echo cancellation is selected in your settings at your end, that might help. I'm not even sure if that's something you've got or if it's just us as hosting. And again, big thanks to the listeners for just bearing with us while we get some of these teething problems sorted. Hopefully we can sort them and not have to make it a really short night. Ray, would you like to give us a little bit of an explanation on your take on how the inauguration day went, snapshots from that?
Well, a couple of things stand out for me, and I think that one, when you look at the optics of this thing, and they were absolutely awful. You have a situation where the incoming administration is speaking on a dais with a very small group of people that are, again, viewed unfavorably by the American public in terms of Congress. And then they're surrounded by 26,000 armed National Guard behind razor wire. And so that again brings up a whole visual of a country in crisis. Not a great look if you're going to be taking over and trying to project an idea of unity or stability.
Indeed. Lyle, what's your thoughts?
Look, I couldn't agree more with what Ray's just said. I thought it was an inauguration of the elites, by the elites, for the elites. And one would have thought that even in this COVID era, you could have had a few thousand people there socially distanced. There was 26,000 army personnel there and razor wire, as Ray said. The risk of violence was very much mitigated, but you just wonder whether there was the enthusiasm and the excitement for Joe Biden presidency as claimed by the Democratic Party in their supposed win of this election.
Yeah. Damien, I don't actually think that there would have been any shortage of a huge crowd and excitement would have filled them all. The left are especially good at getting out and demonstrating their approval or objection to anything political. What are your thoughts? Would there have been a capacity crowd at the mall had they been allowed? And what do you think the actual your assessment? What do you think the actual security risk was at the day if that large presence hadn't been there?
I do think that they probably needed that security just in case, and the threats, the risks might come on either side. It's a new era, and we're very much in a situation where we've got an extremely divided states public. And I think probably they did need significant security. I don't know ways to do that without those optics. I mean, it might have been able to achieve the same similar level of security without such a visually militaristic sort of thing. And they probably could have had reasonable security while having people there.
Yep.
I think, and you're right. I think it would have been full. Would have been obviously half the country, at least for Joe Biden. I guess we'll never know exactly whether it was more than country or not. But it was significantly he had the support of the President of the United States. I think it would have been filled up. So.
Damien, I was in Washington, D.C. 4 years ago at this very time while Donald Trump was being inaugurated. And we tried to get into the mall to watch the inauguration happen. There was really tight security. There was fences, no razor wire, but the whole mall was fenced off. And there was lots of military personnel, lots of vehicles. There were scuffles. There was lots of very intimidating protesters, and I have to say they were from the left. There was extreme anger that Donald Trump had been elected. Remember, Hillary Clinton was saying that the election was stolen. I witnessed violent scuffles in the streets. There were LGBT protests and Antifa-looking people. We actually lined up for hours to try and get through the security. And because it was airport-style security, we actually couldn't get into the mall in time, and there was still a massive queue. So we hightailed it off to a bar nearby and watched the inauguration on a big screen. We could still hear Marine One flying over the top of us when the Obamas left. So we got the atmosphere, but we just couldn't get onto the mall because of the security. I think they could have done something similar to that this year, and with the increased military presence, I don't think there would have been any greater risk of violence than there was 4 years ago when the left were extremely angry about Donald Trump's election.
Oh, so angry that it spilt into 4 years of 4 years of protest. And last year, 7 months of outright violence is unmitigated. Okay, well, we're getting feedback from people that it's basically unlistenable when we're bringing in our remote guests. I apologise for that. It's one of the teething issues of the new studio. I thought we had this solved, but apparently we didn't test it well enough. So my apologies for that. And my apologies to my guests for making your contributions tonight unable to be appreciated by everyone. I guess it's probably maybe worthwhile Lyle and I continuing, but we're going to have to, I guess, cut our guests short if the audience can't hear them anyway. So let's say goodbye. Ray, sincere apologies. We will have to do this again when it's all working.
Absolutely.
And Damien, thank you to you too.
All right.
No problem.
We'll speak soon then.
Yep.
Damien, it's just a little note that you're going to have to come into the studio now. No excuses in weeks to come. You are close enough. We'll get that working one way or another. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.
All right, so that's a little bit unfortunate, certainly sad, but we can have a decent chat for a little while. I don't think we should go for the whole 2 hours that we were potentially talking about. So, yeah, it's Sally says it's not unbearable. So good to see you, Sally. Hard to get a conversation with you these days. We'll have to have a phone chat. But look, one of the things we want to do with this show is actually split up what we were doing on Tuesday nights, which was a little bit about me and a little bit of Q&A. And the Thursday night show, we just want it to be the Q&A style, not Q&A, but featuring all of the good source guests on a regular basis. And so that's obviously going to include those that can't come into the studio from wherever they are. If you've got any tech tips for me on what I'm doing wrong with bringing people in, maybe I need to use a different software platform, which isn't impossible. But we're going to have this conversation, and we want Thursday night to be a conversational Q&A style panel. We'll have occasional guests in who are more high profile, I guess, in their political career or legal career or experts on any particular topic. But mostly, we actually wanted to have it to be a good source show with all of the various independent voices from right of centre that the good source features and promotes, just having a regular conversation, which includes you every Thursday night now. And I do have to say that, Lyle, your show just went live tonight, a little bit later than normal. The plan is for Wednesday mornings throughout this year, but for those people who are wanting to tune in to more conservative content, the Lyle Shelton Show, normally on a Wednesday morning, but just went live an hour ago on The Good Source. Make sure whenever you're watching this, when we're finished, you go and add that to your watch list, because...
Please do, and please catch this week's show after you've watched the live stream tonight with Dave and I, but I've got a terrific interview with Mark Latham.
It is, yeah.
He is leading a parliamentary inquiry into this whole gender fluidity business, and is very courageous, so you'll enjoy that interview.
We probably don't need our earphones anymore because we're not going to be listening to anybody. But we'll have the occasional person drop in during the night because they're scheduled to, and I'm just going to have to apologise to them one at a time, or sit here and text in front of you, maybe while Lyle's talking. One of the things I hadn't seen before, but watched it today as I was editing up. I don't normally edit Lyle's show, but today I was.
I got the special treatment today, thanks, Dave.
And that was Matt Canavan's interview on the Today Show. What a bunch of spoons!
Yeah. Well, we should definitely come back to the US election stuff. But look, when I saw Matt Canavan giving that incredible defence of Michael McCormack while he was doing that stint as acting Prime Minister last week, and the media and the left just went after McCormack because they wanted him to condemn Donald Trump and the riot on Capitol Hill, and of course he condemned the riot. But in the process, he said all political violence is bad on the left and the right, and he said all lives matter. Well, their hair just went on fire. And Matt Canavan found himself on Channel 9 with Sylvia Jeffrey, and she was just indignant that anyone could say the words that all lives matter, because that was undermining the Black Lives Matter movement.
I know. I'm like, is that meant to be a bad thing, Sylvia? That's a great thing.
And of course, Matt's saying, well, of course all lives matter, but then he had the courage on Channel 9 on the Today Show to say, look, there's some nefarious aspects to Black Lives Matter, which we all know the leaders are self-confessed Marxists, and of course that movement was condoning and abetting a whole bunch of violence all through the northern summer, 25 people killed and $2 billion worth of damage, and all the looting and the rioting that went on.
Yeah, no, and it was absolutely what I loved about what Matt did was, and this is the word I'm advocating for us, for politicians, for our side. He was unapologetic.
Yeah, look, I think too often we leave our people on the battlefield. Someone will go out there and say something that offends the left and then finds themselves under enormous pressure to make concessions or to backtrack. And as you said, Matt didn't do that. He stuck to his guns. He defended Michael McCormack. And to Michael McCormack's credit, he spent all last week holding his ground as well. He didn't back down an inch as well. Good. So both of those men, big tick for what they've done. Absolutely.
Look, it is a good opportunity to segue from Matt Canavan to Matt Canavan is just confirmed today one of the guest speakers for the Church and State Summit, which is now a month and 5 days away, the 26th of February. And there's a great opportunity to get tickets to that. I am going to be strictly limiting seats this year. We're going to be probably about half capacity of the number of people who turned up last year. Part of that is due to physical distancing, spacing, etc. But we're also going to a slightly smaller venue, and that's to help manage costs, etc. Venues we've had it at have been fantastic throughout Melbourne, Sydney, Auckland and Brisbane. We're not doing a tour again. This time we're actually doing a synchronised event. So we also have another location in Hobart, which has just been released today. Tickets went on sale for the Church and State Summit in Hobart. And you will be able to be one of more than 100 people in the room there. Really great opportunity for networking, meeting with like-minded people there, and there may be one or two other cities added. It's getting kind of close now, but certainly in the future. It's just a great way to be encouraged and inspired for the culture war. It is a Christian conference, but it's certainly not limited to Christians. Everybody's welcome, but just know in advance it'll be assuming a Christian worldview is undisputed for attendees and speakers.
They've been great conferences, Dave, and full credit to you. I think I've been to all of the ones here in Brisbane over the last few years since I've been back in Queensland. I think it's fantastic that you've got Cardinal Pell coming via video link from Rome.
Yep.
I think his contribution, I think he's going to be giving a lecture on church history, but I'm sure he'll talk about some of the recent travails that he's been through.
Yeah, look, when you say that, I'm afraid people might think it's a bit boring. Trust me, you really want to hear Cardinal Pell talking about church history because it impacts you. The reason is, and the purpose of this talk, it's not just a lesson, it's not just a lecture. We're actually building the conviction, the spine and the confidence for Christians to get involved in the public square, to get involved in the culture war. And one of the ingredients for that is to know who you are, know the remarkable rich legacy of influence on society, on populations, the contributions Christianity has made to the ideal conditions for human flourishing throughout time. So it's actually going to be a very exciting lecture.
No better person to help strengthen our spines and help us know who we are as Christians than Cardinal George Pell, who's lived this out in the public square for many, many years and paid an enormous price. So well done for getting him, Dave.
Let's go back to American politics. Thomas Ferguson asks, here's a question: I'm not convinced Biden can take up Trump's mantle on the international stage. So which likely bad actor takes Trump's position in global politics and who defends the West? Well, that's very interesting because Trump's legacy is ultimately one of peace, not a single war in his administration, which hasn't happened for many, many, many presidents. However, he certainly was the most aggressive rhetorically.
Look, Trump is someone who has been unconventional. He has ruffled feathers on the global stage. He upset NATO by saying you've got to pay for what it costs for us to defend you in Europe. What he did do that was unconventional is he stood up to the Chinese Communist Party. No one had the guts to do that, and previously Joe Biden as vice president to Obama for those 8 years, they appeased the Chinese Communist Party. They let them militarise the South China Sea. Trump has come along and he's thrown a big rock in the pond. I think, in answer to the question, who will stand up for the West now, I don't think it's going to be Joe Biden. I don't think it's going to be whoever his Secretary of State is, and I'm not sure who that is. I know John Kerry is in the administration, but not as Secretary of State. I think we've got to look to countries like Poland and Hungary. They are the ones that are really standing up for Western values, pushing back on the European Union's wokeness and going down that whole sort of left-wing sort of path. The other perhaps flickering flame might even be our own Scott Morrison. At a press conference yesterday, he was asked about the Biden administration's approach to foreign affairs and multilateralism, which is code for globalism. And Morrison straight away said, look, there's good globalism and there's bad globalism. And he said Australia's decisions are going to be made in Australia, not in New York and Geneva. So, look, whether Morrison, we're a middle power, whether he can muscle up enough perhaps with the likes of Poland and Hungary to push back on some of this globalist agenda, time will tell. But we're certainly going to miss Trump's leadership in that space.
Poland and Hungary, I don't know anything about them. Do they have presidents or prime ministers?
Hungary has a prime minister, Viktor Orban. I'm not sure of the governmental structure in Poland, but both of those countries have been notable in that they have stood up to the EU, particularly on family policy. They said, no, we're not going to have same-sex marriage, for instance. Now, that's a litmus test issue in the West, because with that has come all sorts of threats and squashing of freedom of speech and freedom of religion and the rights of children to their mum and dad. So on issues like that, they've also stood up for national sovereignty. I think they've knocked back part of the EU's budget. So they're countries that are saying, yes, we want to cooperate, but we don't want to be homogenised. It's almost like they want to be like their own sort of Brexits, but still within the European Union framework. So it's that globalist versus nation-state sovereignty approach, which is what Trump was championing, which is what Scott Morrison has said in his speech at the UN a year or so ago, and which he seemed to be echoing yesterday at that press conference out the back of Cloncurry, of all places.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I want to bring in our next guest experiment right now. Before I do that, Jonathan, can you go to StreamYard on that computer, go into the cam mic settings and just turn on echo cancellation if it isn't already for us. Done, good. All right. Well, Ellie, welcome to the show. I have to start by apologising. This may be a short-lived appearance tonight, and apologies to all of your devoted fans. And for those who've just tuned in, including Ellie, Alexandra Marshall, we're having terrible echo problems when our remote guests are talking tonight. Lyle and I are coming through nice and clear, but there's something not quite set right in the settings, and it seems to be unresolvable in the short term. So we had to say goodbye to our first two guests tonight rather early. So why don't we do the experiment, and guests, viewers, while you're watching, let us know in the comments how it goes, if we should stick with it or if it's unbearable, and if it improves, if it starts out really badly. Welcome to the Good Source, not Q&A. Alexandra Marshall, how are you?
Well, I did not expect to be doing tech support, but I did bring headphones if you want me to try that instead.
Well, let's try everything. Ray Radowski was on before, and he had his headphones working well, and that wasn't the problem. So it might help, but yeah, it's certainly worth giving everything a go. Colin says, wish Ellie could hang more brass off her ears.
Oi! It's actually cheap plastic, so we're all good.
There we go.
Brass off your ears, you just have earlobes down to here. It wouldn't work.
Okay, well, the early feedback is that the sound is good. So that's encouraging and exciting, because everybody loves themselves a little bit of Alexandra Marshall, rising Twitter star of Queen. Anyway, you're really popular on Twitter, Ellie.
You've got to get it off Damien. He knows the drill. He's got it down. I think it's queen of conservative and libertarian Twitter or something. While
I was trying to improve it, but maybe it was just unimprovable. Ellie, we've been talking about the presidential inauguration, and for me, I've been absolutely repulsed today by the sycophantic gushing. I think one of the headlines or screen titles on the morning news this morning was something like "President of Peace," a president of healing, the healer in chief. That's what it was, the healer in chief. Joe Biden's title. How much hope do you have? I mean, I would love him to be the healer in chief. If anybody can do it and bring the left and right together to make America great again, I would love for anybody to do it. I don't care who does it, but is he going to be the healer in chief, or is it the kind of peace via submission that he's promising?
Well, I'll answer your actual question first with a simple no. As for your first question about whether or not I watched the inauguration, I was considering recording it to watch at a more sensible hour than 4 a.m. or whatever it was meant to be on at. And then I saw CNN's pre-wrap, the dawn prayer service, and they were describing the lights down the water as Joe Biden's arms embracing America. And I was like, I'm out. It's just a pre-prayer stuff. There's no way I'm going to make it through the whole hour or whatever it was. But I'll tell you something that interesting is that it hasn't been all love and cuddles all the way across the world. The EU, of all places, had one of their French MPs stand up and have a very interesting and was a little bit of a harsh sort of slap against the Democrats and what's been going on in America with the Capitol Hill riots, but also the way the left has handled themselves during both the election and afterwards, talking about how appalling it is that they'd allow Silicon Valley to get rid of a sitting president, the leader of the free world, whilst he was still president, and what that says about American politics and the status of freedom in the West, and more importantly, how much control social media and legacy media now has over politics, which if they can erase a president, they can erase quite literally anybody.
Yes, indeed. That probably introduces a great topic, Lyle, of exactly what the landscape is now, which has shifted so radically in the last week, if not two, with social media and freedom of speech, and it's just gotten worse if we ever thought it was possible.
It's absolutely frightening. And look, like Ellie, I was watching CNN last night till about midnight, and the perniciousness of the coverage was just the snarky, sneering. We are rid of this vulgarian. The nation can heal again. Joe's going to bring dignity and civility back, and by implication, they were tarring all of us who have conservative views as if we're somehow complicit in some sort of insurrection that happened on the Capitol. And so you combine that dynamic with what big tech have been doing, and it's a frightening thing. So yes, that they've turned off the Twitter feed of the commander-in-chief of the most powerful nation in the world. They've sent a big message to any of us. If you want to associate with that sort of political agenda, well, we're watching and we can turn you off too. So I think this is really chilling times for those of us who have a conservative view of politics.
Yeah. My suggestion for everybody is make sure you're on every mailing list from every voice that's important to you. Certainly subscribe to The Good Source so we can send you all the articles that people like Alexandra and Lyle and the other contributors make, because you may not see them on social media forever. I think it's certainly a question of when, not if, we're going to get cancelled.
I've already lost my Parler account. Parler has been down for 2 weeks. I'm cancelled off Parler.
Yeah, well, all of us are cancelled off Parler. Ellie, what are the platforms and what are the solutions you think to I don't know if the sovereign risk is the right word, but the corporate risk of these most popular, highest profile social media corporations?
Well, first of all, I'm going to ask if either of you guys saw Lady Gaga going on about how wonderful the anthem was after years of the left telling us how racist the American anthem was and how it shouldn't be sung anymore.
I didn't see that, no.
Now they're in power. The anthem is suddenly very patriotic and it's okay to be American again. And the Chinese embassy and one of the Chinese press were basically being quite rude about Donald Trump and very warm about Biden. And it does make you worry about what the relationship is with China and the Democrats. This is what we're in for on day one on Twitter. It was a whole little Twitter thing they're having going. But as for big tech and what we can do, the problem with big tech, of course, is that most of our social media platforms and indeed our lives are now built on cloud technology, which is just servers, in a back room somewhere. But those servers are owned by a very small amount of companies. So most of the big platforms are actually on AWS, which is Amazon's servers, and they are hosted in the United States. So for anybody who's not quite sure how this works, it doesn't matter where your company is registered. The rules of the platforms and of the servers are where the servers are actually registered, which is in the US. So almost all these platforms are bound by US law. So that means that there's very little that an Australian government can do about big tech if it's got its servers in the US. It really is up to the United States of America and that government to pull up big tech on its censorship and antitrust laws, which is bad news for Parliament.
Yet we see that Google and Facebook are getting really upset about Australian proposed laws to make them pay for the news that they publish.
Yeah, so I wrote a whole article on this. When you get right down into it, it's more of a threat by our Australian government than an actual thing they can really legislate. They can try and coerce Google and Facebook into giving money over to businesses, but at the end of the day, they've got no legal jurisdiction over those companies. Then those companies can always just black Australia out if they want to, which is exactly what happened when the European Union tried to pass their Articles 11 and 13. We had companies like Wikipedia and YouTube just completely blacklisting the European continent, which sent their MPs into a bit of a panic. So although the Australian government wants to try and say, oh, we can legislate it, all they can really do is ban it, like China does with its big tech. So it's not really a solution to the problem. But it is a sort of a symbiotic relationship, not with the government, but big tech has a relationship with its content providers. So it's more likely that they'll reach arrangements basically for business reasons and marketing reasons rather than the government snarling at them from the corner. So be careful with that. But yeah, so
this is probably the comment of the evening so far, Ellie. The comment of the evening from Psycheldelic 44. Lady Gaga added to the whole Hunger Games feel of the ceremony. I think
she was wearing a big gold dove of peace or whatever, a piece of jewelry that most people can't afford. So she was really showing off her.
Is this the same Lady Gaga who said she wanted to? Is this the same Lady Gaga, Ellie, who said she wanted to blow up the White House?
Wasn't that Madonna?
No,
oh, that was Madonna.
That was
okay,
Madonna.
well, we're both blonde singers.
But that wasn't an incitement to violence.
No, of course not.
So, look, I used to love them. I still like both of their music, but honestly, you wouldn't want these people running the country. They should really stick to music and leave politics to politicians. But with Parler, you're talking about how Parler just went like that overnight. I mean, I had a couple of thousand followers over there, and all of a sudden it was just off. And that's because Parler has their servers with AWS. And so Amazon said, oh, because you've got some violent and dangerous content on your platform, we're going to pull your services. And what they did, allegedly, is break not only their contract that they had with Parler, which meant to have I think it's 2 weeks notice before you pull a service, but they also seem to have broken antitrust, which is anti-competitive laws in the US. And they've not applied their legislation evenly. So you can go onto Twitter and there are plenty of Nazis on Twitter. There's a whole massive load of communists who want to destroy the whole world. I mean, ISIS is on Twitter. There are entire regimes that want to kill the West on Twitter. I mean, heck, China's on Twitter, who talk about, their Uyghur lockdown and they call that female emancipation. That's all fine, right? But that's the excuse that Amazon used to get rid of Parler. So that's why Parler has launched lawsuits, because there's no equality of these very vague terms and conditions that Silicon Valley is using to basically crush competition. And that's all at the end of the day, that's what we're watching, is competition being destroyed, because Twitter went off a cliff. when it got rid of Trump, and about 100,000 users they got rid of almost overnight. It's been pretty bad.
And their market value. You make my blood boil, Ellie, just talking about the hypocrisy. And leftists don't care that you call them hypocritical. They don't care that they are hypocritical. But the hypocrisy of letting the Ayatollahs keep their accounts and
Ellie, what is it with this business of Twitter shedding our followers? I've lost about 450 followers just mysteriously in the last 2 weeks since the Capitol Hill riots. And I know other conservative people have. You probably have. What is that?
Is that Twitter, or is that people leaving Twitter?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I've lost about 2,500, and it's a mixture of things. So first up, Twitter was back to its old habit of quite literally suspending thousands and thousands of accounts, and it does that for no reason. And so we've seen 3 or 4 cullings like this around the US presidential election, where they just went through and massacred conservative accounts. And then they added a second massacre, which was anybody who posted a link to Gab or Parler. They said that was a breach of their terms of service because you've linked to a third-party website, which must be real news to all the news websites whose entire platform is about linking to third-party sites. So they were getting rid of so many people that they started causing a backlash. So then people started deleting their accounts, but the vast majority were people who were actually suspended. And because I follow back, you can tell the difference. If somebody unfollows you because you say something they don't like, you stay following them. And so your ratio remains the same. If Twitter suspends an account, you can see your numbers going down at the same time because you obviously unfollow accounts that no longer exist.
Okay.
So it's definitely a mass suspension going on, and some people deleting accounts. Now, at the same time, you guys might not have noticed that they also went through and deleted a whole stack of pro-democracy Hong Kong accounts. So they were being wiped off the map. Yeah, I've got a fair following in that community, and they're all just going. And people writing to say that China has obviously put pressure on Twitter somehow to remove all these pro-democracy accounts that were sitting there. So that there's a couple of cullings going on at the moment.
That's shocking.
Yeah.
Different topic, change of pace. Look, there's always going to be this news and this conversation at this time of year because some people are just determined to not let us be happy and be Australian. But it's the normal Australia Day protests, and there's some vile, vicious, unhappy people out there trying to make everybody else unhappy. But Cricket Australia has today decided that they're going to cancel Australia Day. Their Australia Day cricket game is going to be called the January 26 cricket game. And they believe this will help reconciliation. Ellie, is there any chance that there's going to be any Aboriginal lives improved by Cricket Australia not mentioning the word Australia on Australia Day?
Well, let's be clear. These aren't normal activist protests. They are Marxist protests. And the whole point of their entire ideology that they're going through is they don't want Australia to exist as a nation or a concept of a nation at all. So you cannot state them by changing dates, changing names, changing words. They don't like the concept of a nation in general. They want the whole global socialism. There are no borders. There are no nations. We're all one global community. That's the end goal. And politicians really have to start understanding what these groups are actually asking for, because as soon as you know what they're on, you can see that you can't placate them with these stupid changes that they're making, which only upsets the majority of people who are just, normal Australians who love their country and are having a great celebration of this nation and everything that we are and have achieved as a country in such a short period of time. I mean, we really are young on the world stage as far as being a coherent nation. And it's amazing what we've achieved. And to try and erase how far we've all come together, especially considering that Australia's story on a historic global scale is one of the most peaceful stories around in existence.
Of course,
every other country had a terrible time getting where they are, and some countries are still having a shocking time with it. So,
and in the 18th century or late 18th century, when imperialism was the latest rage among the nations, and all kinds of imperial powers were expanding their territories, colonizing and settling everywhere. I don't know. I mean, England did plenty wrong. Some of my ancestors were dispossessed by English imperialism. Yeah. But if there was an empire that you had to pick from in the inevitability of being invaded, England was one of the more just and civilized ones.
Well, particularly at the time when Australia was settled, you had the abolitionists running the anti-slavery campaign through the British Parliament. That influenced Arthur Phillip. He said that this is correct, to be a place where there will be no slavery. Mm-hmm. Now, that was almost unheard of in the Western world. It was a radical concept. Yep. There was plenty of examples where for instance, the Royal Society told Captain Cook to make sure that he treated the Indigenous people well. Phillip certainly had that idea. Now, you can't sugarcoat a history. Yes, we did have some massacres. Yes, there were some terrible things that happened. Yep. But by and large, as a country, Australia has sought to live up to its ideals and has done so.
And even through that period, some of those people responsible for massacres were then executed by the government.
The Mile Creek massacre, it shocked the colony that white men were hung for killing Aboriginals at Mile Creek in northern New South Wales. So we did, imperfectly, yes, but we did try and live up to our ideals. And to this day we do. And for these continued Australia Day wars to go on and on, as Ellie said, it is driven by people who dislike the nation state. They don't want us to have some sort of a shared identity and pride in our nation. And that's the real agenda here. And it needs to be called out and it's got to be resisted.
Yep. Well, a big welcome. Sorry, Ellie.
I was going to say that's because the whole activist mentality, it's a money-making exercise. They make a fortune. There's a whole stack of organizations and people who are just raking in the cash, trading off, creating civil and racial unrest. And they will continue to do it until the end of time, for as long as they can make money out of it. But just with the idea of the English empire and imperialism and colonialism, let's not forget that the entire story of human history, from as early as we can go back in every nation, is conquest. It's not like the Europeans were the first people to go out in the world and start conquering stuff. They were conquered themselves early on by the other empires that were before them. It's just that they were the most recent in our modern history, and what they built is still here. So we mustn't allow that narrative to be like they're the first people who went around conquering stuff. It's just simply not true. And as you correctly pointed out, they did come here with the purpose and the strict idea of creating a peaceful, prosperous nation. And that must be one of the first times in history that was the express wishes and orders. And some of the stories from early on are beautiful, the way they try to rehabilitate convicts. It wasn't like you came here and that was the end of the time. It was all about trying to rebuild an equal and civil civilization here at the edge of the world, and it was not easy.
Yeah. One of the we're about to be joined by another guest tonight. Hopefully, again, audio's working. George Christensen is the federal member for Dawson, and one of the games I like to play with my friends is Good Scott, Bad Scott. He's not a perfect man, and we need to call his errors and his good. The Prime Minister Scott Morrison. We need to call the good with the bad, and be as objective and as honest as possible. But welcome to the show, George Christensen, your boss today, telling Cricket Australia that they should stick to sport and stay out of politics. In my opinion, good, Scott.
100%. Look, for cricket of all codes to be delving into the realm of politics, they need to focus on the game, which is exactly what the Prime Minister says for many, many reasons. But on the global issue, Lyle Shelton is absolutely right. The people who are complaining about the date of Australia Day are not going to stop complaining about it once the date changes. It is an attack at the symbol of nationhood. That is really all it is. It's people who actually have the black armband view of Australian history. And if we actually look at Australia Day, I mean, it's called Invasion Day by people. Well, actually, one of my ancestors come to Australia, not then, but come in a similar manner to the people on the First Fleet. He was forcibly brought over as a convict. He wasn't invading. He was forced basically at gunpoint to come over to Australia. I assume that he probably would prefer to have stayed in England or Ireland, but it was no invasion. So that's an absolute nonsense for start. Secondly, someone's pointed out to me in recent days that actually the date also marks the passage of an Act of Parliament which made Australia sovereign and granted citizenship to all people. So that's something that hasn't been remarked on much, but I think that that's important as well.
Absolutely. Lyle.
Look, if we can't be proud of who we are and have a national identity and celebrate our nation's achievements, then that just undermines the morale of a people and just saps our confidence. And we can't go forward as a people unless we are secure in the knowledge of who we are, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And overwhelmingly, for a country like Australia, it is the good. I just think it's also interesting that many of these left-wing councils in these inner city areas of Melbourne and other places are using COVID as an excuse to close down Australia Day celebrations, yet they're happy to have Invasion Day dawn services. And of course, the radical left-wing Get Up organisation is promoting these. So, the left, on one hand, that they've got the Washington Mall deserted for Joe Biden's inauguration because COVID, and yet let's have Invasion Day rallies but cancel the Australia Day ceremonies. It's outrageous.
I actually think those people who are perhaps with good I don't want to give them too much credit. That's not deserved. There are people with good intentions. Let me just be more generous perhaps than is fair, err on the side of generosity. But certainly from our traditions of Christianity, there are people who are wanting to both celebrate and lament on Australia Day. And it seems somewhat circumspect and objective. But my question would be, are you lamenting all of Australia's mistakes or just the ones that would underwrite a racism narrative? Are you lamenting the genocide of abortion that our nation has wrecked over these times? Are you lamenting, all of the things that Australia has gotten wrong in our immaturity as we started as a nation? Or are you just trying to make this about race? Maybe as a useful idiot, maybe that wasn't your plan or your intention. But to me, it seems like where are we going to stop if we start recounting on our national day of celebration designed to inspire pride and celebration and unity? If we start recounting all of the grievances that have been done in the name of the government against individuals and identity groups.
Going right back to convicts, as George said, and I've got convicts in my lineage. Look, I think the issue for going forward is there's got to be forgiveness and reconciliation between black and white and black. And we can't just keep dwelling on, yes, there were injustices that were done in the past. There were massacres of Indigenous people. That was terrible.
Of course.
There were white settlers who were massacred as well. The famous Hornet Bank massacre at Wandoan here in Queensland was terrible. There was violence both ways. There was violence between the tribes. They were warring tribes. History records that. Should they be apologising to each other and lamenting the violence done? When tribes would come in the middle of the night and club, the neighbouring tribe to death with nullas. Where does this stop? I think we've got to come to a place where we are willing to forgive each other and receive forgiveness, and then be thankful together for the good things that we've done, for the opportunities that we've created for all people, whether they're Indigenous people or new migrants. This is a land of incredible opportunity, and I think we should celebrate that and have some forgiveness in our hearts for the things that were done in the past. Otherwise, we'll never be able to move on. But I think, as Ellie rightly said, and George gave me the credit, but Ellie made the point earlier, these people are really trying to undermine the idea of nation state. It goes back to this globalist agenda that we were talking about earlier, which I think Joe Biden is very sympathetic to as well.
Yeah.
May I make 2 points?
Yeah, please, Alexandra.
While we're talking about children, the only reason that we're even having this discussion is because we've allowed a generation or two of teachers to tell our kids to hate this country and to rewrite our own history and to teach children that there's nothing to be proud of and nothing worthwhile in this nation. And then what they did is they didn't tell them to put anything else in its place. So this activism right now is not actually reaching for anything in particular. It is almost disagreeing for the sake of having something to disagree with. And that's really dangerous because you cannot solve something if it doesn't have an end goal. It's almost endless.
These people, they work on a global scale. I mean, the first thing that Joe Biden has done since being inaugurated, the very afternoon after he left the National Mall, was to sign an executive order scrapping President Donald Trump's 1776 proposal, which was to do exactly what you are saying, to help educate American children in the proper history of the country, not to whitewash slavery or anything like that, but to help instill that civic pride. We could do well with that sort of education here in Australia, because you're right, our kids are taught that colonialism is all bad and nothing good happened, whereas that was an era which built our country. So you're exactly right, Ellie, but this is happening globally, and it's part of a push to undermine Western civilization everywhere and to make us feel ashamed of who we are as Western people.
Yeah, the reason I've got this bookshelf behind me is because as one of those kids, I didn't really get an education on political history or Australian history, so I've had to pretty much start from scratch, and I'm still working my way through it. But the other point I'd make is you were talking about the fact that Australia was no Eden when we arrived here and it sort of started to become colonized. It was just like every other part of the world. It was a place of warring tribes, and they had their own problems. And one of my ancestors, a great-great-great-grandfather, was one of the first people to actually live amongst the Aboriginal community down in South Australia and to document their customs and their cultures. And he lived with them and travelled around with them for a long time. And you're exactly right. They had a whole stack of special fighting tools and equipment, and the only purpose of that was to basically make war with each other. But you won't see this. We've got a sanitized version of one history and a demonized version of another, and it's simply not an accurate representation of the country that we are currently living in. And it's not very helpful to start going back and apologize for crimes that weren't committed by the people who are alive today, because who's going to apologize to, I don't know, me for all the French wars and all the German wars and the 100 Years' Wars? And what about when the Romans came through and tackled all of Britain? And when are we going to stop with history's mistakes? Because those ghosts are long dead. There's nothing anyone can do about it. We have to focus on where we're going as a nation, what we're going to build, what our world is going to look like, because there are a lot of problems coming in the very near future, and sort of wading through the past is not going to solve any of these problems.
Yeah. I want to come back to George and get some reflections on the Trump inauguration and the Biden agenda. But just a little ad break first. We've got some more guest speakers coming up. It seems like the audio problems are solved, so that'll be great. However, can I encourage you? The Great Purge is happening. It's a matter of when, not if, conservative programs like our own get taken off the major corporate social media channels. So make sure you go to goodsource.news and add your email address and subscribe to the email updates there. You can choose from daily, weekly, or monthly, and you can also choose which commentators you'd prefer to hear from more often to make sure you don't miss out on your favorites. You don't have to get absolutely everything. And then, of course, the best way to disrupt the lying harlot, the mainstream media, is to actually encourage all of your friends to also get the good source instead of the deceitful, malicious agenda that's served up with advertising dollars. So that would be really great. George, what do you think of the I guess the first day of inauguration now of the Biden presidency, what he's already done with, and the way the media is even covering the revocation of the executive order, which sought to prevent the most dangerous countries which supplied immigrants to Australia or travelled to America. I'm sorry, not Australia. They're calling it the Muslim ban. Let's talk about your thoughts on the inauguration firstly, and then Biden's agenda as well.
I didn't watch the inauguration. I had much better things to do than to watch the inauguration of Joe Biden. So I can't comment on the inauguration apart from to say I've read the news of all of the things that the new president has brought in. It seems to be trying to undo everything Trump has done, and also going completely and utterly politically correct and woke at the same time. The gender pronouns, I'm sure that's already been raised, that they're up on the White House page. What you just spoke about with the so-called Muslim ban, which wasn't a ban, neither was it targeted at Muslims either. It was targeted at countries where there is a high level of violence and extremism. But a range of things I hear as well, not that there was an order signed, but they're going to be looking at the wall that President Trump built and see whether they can take parts of that down. They're certainly ceasing that wall from being built any further. The 1776 Commission done away with, a range of different things. It's just like they are trying to scrub the past 4 years. And I don't recall any of this coming up during the election campaign. I don't recall any of the things being said actually being done. Any of the things being done, rather, being said during the campaign. So it's quite curious that they get in there and then this agenda just drops out straight away.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a very good observation. I think those of us who follow the politics and know what the left's agenda is understand that. And I think people are very bewildered at the moment as to what all the fuss has been about with the violence and everything. And I was reflecting on this today. I think those of us who are conservative, we perhaps bristled at Trump's tone, but we liked his policies, and I think his policies were right. You watch Biden's inauguration, and he's got the tone right, but his policies are toxic. And he's sort of putting out this olive branch of what I call faux unity, saying, and I think you said it earlier, Dave, where he wants to bring the country together and have peace, but it's peace on his terms. And if you listen very carefully to what he was saying, it means you have to buy into all this woke agenda, because that's the only way that you can have peace. He talks about lies versus truth, and the implication being that if you've supported the policies of Donald Trump, put aside the personality, but if you support the policies, then you're essentially a domestic terrorist like him. And the only way to have unity and peace and civility and bring back dignity to the office of president and government in the US is to do it on the terms of the woke left, and that means buying into the whole gender pronouns thing. He's appointed as his assistant health commissioner Rachel Levin, who is a biological male, lived as a man, was married, had kids until his 40s, and now is an advocate for gender fluidity. So yes, there's this whole other agenda that's come with the Biden-Harris administration, and I think it's going to be a big wake-up call to people.
I'm smiling as you talk because one of the headlines I saw today was early criticism. Of course, the left inevitably eat their own, but he's being criticised for, and if I remember this correctly, it's an acronym I'd never heard of before, but not having an AAPI person. I don't know if you meant to say AIPI or AP, but what it stands for is Asian American Pacific Islander. So he doesn't have an AAPI person in his cabinet.
Shocking.
It's not representative enough. So it's odd. Alexandra, is the best cabinet to run the country determined by identity, immutable traits instead of competency?
Do I even have to answer that question? I'd rather point out that let's be quite clear with the Democrats. They are only interested in peace once they are in possession of power. They were quite happy to stir all kinds of civil unrest and violence if they thought they could use that to win themselves power at an election. But once they got power, they're like, oh, please all calm down. And how disappointed are the Antifa and Black Lives Matter movements now that defund the police is no longer a thing? It's all very highly militarized and police happy at the moment around the Biden inauguration and campaign. So, they changed their tone, not because they really believe in the concepts they've been pushing, but because they were useful in order to gain power. And you've got to be really careful with regimes that have no moral integrity or consistency with their ideology. These regimes like the Democrats and Biden are only interested in how they can secure power and how they can manipulate the population in order to achieve that goal. And we've seen that with plenty of governments across the world, and it's not a direction that we were hoping America would go in, especially as they are leaders of the free world, or they were. I worry that Australia, like Scott Morrison, is sort of edging in a similar direction to the whole Biden America woke, love in, and it's a worry because this ends in tragedy, and we know it will end in tragedy. So I don't think I actually answer your question, because gender quotas are not a thing. So you don't want to run a cabinet on a quota. And now that gender
it was a softball just to give you the mic.
I think now. So what does it matter? Like, you can't have a quota if you can just change who you are at the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
Can I say I don't think that ScoMo is going to be chasing the Biden woke policies anytime soon. But while all of the cultural changes that they seem to have put in place or going to put in place are definitely worrying, because unfortunately, normally where America goes, Australia follows shortly thereafter. What is very worrying is the economic and also geopolitical issues. My understanding is that the Biden administration today has cancelled the Keystone oil pipeline. That was going to be a major pipeline that was going to put about 800,000 barrels of oil a day, transport that from Alberta to the Texas Gulf Coast, and get that onto the international markets. And I don't know what fuel prices have done in your part of the world, but here in North Queensland, in Mackay, they've jumped 10 cents today on the back of that announcement. So that has a direct impact on everywhere in the world, decisions like that. And it's another woke decision, woke in terms of environmentalism, and being all climate changey and Paris agreementy. But the other thing that's a concerning geopolitically, I guess, is what the new administration's relationship is going to be, and attitude is going to be towards communist China. The jury's out, but I guess that what we have heard about, potential issues there with the Biden family being involved in China in terms of business, what we have heard in terms of the Chinese Communist Party actually preferring a Biden administration, I guess it doesn't bode well. I guess here in Australia, we want to know that the US, regardless of which party is in power, is going to back up its allies in the face of major threats. And time will tell whether or not they've got our back.
Indeed.
I think it's a real worry. As you've identified, George, one of Biden's, again, first initiatives was to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, I know Australia is part of that. I think that's disappointing. But the only people rejoicing in the US re-entering that agreement is the Chinese Communist Party, because that agreement allows China to continue building coal-fired power stations for decades to come, while we have to wind down our coal-fired power stations and replace them with windmills, which are made in China, as Matt Keane in New South Wales is doing. So the Paris
Agreement...
And
the solar panels, lol.
And the solar panels. So the Paris Agreement allows China to become strong as an energy superpower, while weakening Australia and the US in terms of energy security. So this is a bad deal. And look, I think also from a geopolitical point of view, I think it's only a matter of time before the Chinese Communist Party marches into Taiwan and invades that island and takes it over. I mean, they've essentially taken over Hong Kong in breach of the agreement that was made with the British when the lease ended. They've been practicing war games, mock invasions of islands in the Taiwan Straits, and I just think it's a matter of time. And I don't think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will have the ticker to stand up to it. I thought it was interesting in Biden's inaugural address. He said the biggest threats to America were domestic terrorism, aka Trump voters, systemic racism, and climate change. He made no reference to the Chinese Communist Party, which is the greatest existential threat facing America and Australia and the free world.
Yep, absolutely. And on top of that, Lyle, I guess that last year, when there was the massive CCP convention, or whatever you'd like to call it, you had senior generals there that were talking about the invasion of Taiwan. And only about a week or two ago, did Xi Jinping actually tell its military that they had to be basically on war footing.
On war footing, yeah.
This something is brewing, and again, if China invades Taiwan and the world does nothing, then they know they can do whatever they want, and it won't stop there. It will not stop there. Taiwan is a sovereign nation, whether or not people recognise it as such, or countries recognise it as such. It is a sovereign nation. It is a sovereign government. And for another country to march in and just say, that's it, we're taking over, all of your freedoms are gone, when they are a free, loving people, then this can happen anywhere. What stops it to happening anywhere else inside Southeast Asia, or indeed throughout the Asia Pacific?
Yeah. I've lost a thought in my head, but feel free. You look, Keith, you've got something intelligent to say.
Well, look. Sorry, you go, Ellie. Yeah,
please.
Yeah, no, I was going to say George had a great point with the share prices and everything that's going on. Like all opening socialist governments, everything's great for a short period of time, and I think we will see business and shares going up for maybe, if we're really lucky, 8 months to a year. But the problem is, when you empower a nation like China to continue building its assets and expanding its influence over various regions, it will all come crashing down quite horrifically in a reasonably short period of time, probably 2 or 3 years. And if you take a broader geopolitical look at what China has been up to with their Belt and Road Initiative, which is basically debt trapping vast swaths of nations, and nations you wouldn't even consider part of the Arab League, for instance. Most of those nations are now so heavily indebted to China, who've built their ports, their roads, and their infrastructure, that China essentially has military bases in all of these nations now. Once they decide, as you quite correctly point out, to invade Taiwan, which is basically the new Poland, you watch what the world does, and I bet you anything you like that America will make a lot of noise, but they won't actually do anything to stop it. And once China has proof that no one is going to stop them, it's going to be just a disaster for geopolitical stability. And the other problem we've got with America at the moment is Joe Biden's big sponsors were all munitions companies. And so I have a feeling he's going to start stirring up wars or joining civil conflicts for humanitarian reasons across different regions. The first one I saw trending on Twitter before he was even sworn in was the Ethiopian conflict going on, in Tedros's old homeland. The Tigray Liberation Army is once again slaughtering civilians. So I think we'll have a far more conflict-heavy world, of which China will gradually rise to the top of that conflict. And with a depowered US and the EU, which is kind of doesn't know what it is, doesn't know which direction to take, it's going to be more dangerous, I think, than the opening of the Second World War, because we don't have the strength of position to start from, and our countries are not self-sufficient like they once were. So people are kidding themselves that they think we're not going to be facing an era of conflict in this situation.
Yeah, I think your analysis of history is brilliant, Ali. I would have said perhaps that Hong Kong was Poland, and that Taiwan is going to be Czechoslovakia, and then it's all in. What's that?
Well, the problem with Hong Kong is that there was no realistic way to defend it, because it's not a self-sufficient country. There was nothing anyone could realistically do with Hong Kong, but Taiwan is a nation that can survive on its own.
Maybe I should have said that. Maybe I should have said that Hong Kong was actually Austria. That's probably more analogous. And then Taiwan is Czechoslovakia, and then probably Tibet, or that disputed border area with India, where there's actually been a bit of a hot war going on between Indian soldiers and PLA soldiers. That's probably Czechoslovakia. But it's really, really serious, and history does repeat itself. I mean, you could also draw parallels with the start of World War I in 1914 as well, where the world just sort of stumbled into war because of a whole confluence of events, and the nation, the great powers not really having their eye on the ball, and you had an aggressor in the form of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the German Empire. Here we have a similar situation where you've got an aggressive, warmongering Chinese Communist Party, looking to expand empire, and we could find ourselves, literally stumbling into war like they did in the summer of 1914, when no one really expected it.
Yeah. Well, India and Russia are the two big unknowns, because we knew what Putin would do. We're not quite sure what his successor would do. And India, of course, is a longtime friend of Russia, and they're all signatories to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So what they do they really want a world run by China and the Arab League? I doubt Russia really wants that, but India is surrounded by hostile forces. So they are the two nations that the world has to watch to decide how this is really going to play out.
And they're all nuclear armed.
Great. Good times ahead.
Yeah.
I just hope that I just worry about who's going to be France in this game. France
will be France. Always.
Yeah, there's always a France. But look, some of the listeners and viewers on YouTube have been making some great points, and also Twitter. One of them, Christian Wood, mentioned that Iraq was a sovereign nation, and that's absolutely true. I was someone that talking about this in the context of Taiwan, and I guess that the invasion of Iraq is exactly why there should be no more of these sort of forever wars going on. But it's exactly why you don't invade a sovereign nation, because you get all the unrest that comes from it. And I was someone that originally supported the Iraq War, but now I think that was just such a stupid decision in hindsight. And Tracy Manthorpe just sums it all up with her comment that the military-industrial complex will be rejoicing. Endless wars will make them $80 billion a year. And they're the only ones that are going to be winning out of this. What's going to be happening is mass death from every soldier that goes into this these conflicts. Is just going to be mass death.
Well, George, I wanted to ask you about this, and this plays into the comments you're just making, but you have been campaigning, or had campaigned heavily, for Donald Trump to pardon Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks. He didn't do that, but I presume part of your reasoning for that was because of what you just said, because Assange exposed so much of what has gone on, and the corruption and the lies and the misinformation by the US deep state, essentially.
There's a myriad of reasons for the pardoning of Assange, and I know that it's not every conservative's cup of tea. The intel and reports that I've seen is that Trump was actually favourable to doing it. That's a moot point now, but was pretty much blocked by his senior legal counsel at the White House, and also pretty much told by messenger that if he did that Mitch McConnell and the Republican senators would basically impeach him in the Senate. So that's a convict him.
Well, that's interesting, George, because one of those senior players is Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, who is probably the architect of those endless wars. So, look, you don't want to go down conspiracy rabbit holes, but if it's Cheney and McConnell, well, that's right. If it's Cheney and McConnell who essentially, use leverage, blackmailed Trump to not pardon Assange, that's a real worry.
Yeah, I don't think it's conspiracy theories. It's obvious that there is this sort of neocon element in the Republican Party. They also filter into the Democrats, that same sort of hawkish mentality, particularly in relation to the Middle East. And, it's the sort of philosophy that pervaded Hillary Clinton's agenda, I guess. So, but you asked about Assange. Can I just say that, yes, one of the reasons was that for my support for a pardon for Assange was the fact that he exposed the excesses of big government. That's something that I think conservatives should be celebrating, not demonizing. He exposed the fact that there was government overreach in a war like the Iraq War and also the Afghanistan War, these endless wars. He also exposed the overreach of the CIA, again, big government delving into the private lives of its own citizens. He's exposed big corporations like Google and what they do. He's someone who is an Australian citizen, and this is contention about whether he's a journalist or not. The very least you can say he's a publisher. He's published information, and for that he's locked up in a foreign jail cell, facing an appeal in a foreign court, potentially to be extradited to another foreign nation, where he'll sit in another foreign jail cell and face another foreign court, and he could be locked up in that foreign jail cell for 175 years. For national sovereignty, I don't think that's right that an Australian citizen that has not set foot in the country, well, he has, but he hasn't set foot in the country to do the crime that he's charged with. That is really, really worrying. I mean, what happens if China tries this on? What are we going to do if China tries this this on?
George, your argument rings true, that sovereignty question and jurisdiction, etc. But come back to the morals of the arguments, I guess, or maybe I shouldn't put that kind of constraint on you. What I want you to do is explain to me the best arguments you've heard from your counterparts. You said some conservatives may not share your views. What's the best arguments, the most credible arguments, and do them justice in the retelling, please?
Yeah, look, the argument against Assange. The argument against Assange is that he did more than just journalism, that he actually, there was a conspiracy to hack secret information out of the US government, along with Bradley Manning, now known as Chelsea Manning, that he assisted and enabled this Manning to extract secret information out of the US, which he then went and put in his online publication WikiLeaks. Now that is strongly disputed and unproven, and it's a bit like explaining to someone how to set up an email account. I mean, is that really a conspiracy to commit a crime if you're explaining to someone how to go about doing something which many people might do? Now, of course, the information was used in the commission of a crime by the person who used that information. So there's a dispute over that. The other thing that's said against him is that the information that was put on the net was just done really recklessly, that there was no redaction. We actually saw the Veritas Project, which is a team of conservative journalists in the US, actually release a tape recording of a video of a telephone call between Julian Assange when he was in WikiLeaks and the US State Department, as it was under Hillary Clinton, telling them that actually he had attempted to redact. One of his former employees had gone rogue. They had access to these documents, and he worried that they were actually going to be put on the net in an unredacted fashion, and he wanted the State Department to take action. He was going to assist them in taking action to actually stop that from happening. So, I don't think it can be said that he committed a conspiracy to hack, and I don't think it can be said that he was reckless. Can I say one other thing, which is just so bizarre? One of the things that he's charged with in this conspiracy to hack, they say that part of the proof of the conspiracy is that there was a statement up on the WikiLeaks website, and he had repeated the same statement verbally at different conferences, where he was encouraging people to actually come to them with secret information regarding a range of different topics. Now, is that committing a crime? I can't believe that we are hearing that activity alone is the commission of a crime. That really is bad news for free speech.
Yeah. I want to just bring back in Ellie, just to give us one final thought before we let you go, and we try again with Ray Radowski, our North American expert. What's your take, Ellie, on the whole Julian Assange thing? Guilty, not guilty, hero, villain, should he have been pardoned?
I think with Julian Assange, the state is entitled to its secrets, but it's not entitled to its secrets forever. And it's certainly not entitled to commit crimes and then not tell anyone about them. And so there's a fine line between journalism and doing the right thing by the people and keeping state secrets. And I think in Assange's case, considering how he did it, what he did, I think he was walking that line correctly. I think I would say not necessarily free Assange, but at least bring him back for a fair trial, which he has been basically denied. And the reason that he's been denied that is because the secrets that he's revealed and still has to reveal involve powerful people inside government, and they involve activities that they should not have been doing. And that's the real story behind this, is the depth of what the information he has does not reflect well on America or on other governments as well, or on the people in charge of America. And that's why they have hunted him so relentlessly. And that's why he will never be pardoned. There's just too much caught up in it. So, yeah, I think in his case, it wasn't, it's always a difficult thing. I would say he was erring on the side of doing good for the general population rather than the state. But I know it's contentious inside these conservative circles.
Yeah, it's certainly a view that I am open to hearing both sides of. I probably certainly started where George said a lot of people are, on the side of, government needs some secrets, and if you get to make up your own rules on when you break the rules, there might as well not be any rules. I think there's really good arguments for George's case.
Yeah, I'd go so far as to say it was a crime, but I don't think he did the wrong thing, if that's a line that I can walk there.
Clever.
But isn't it the case with all journalists? I mean, journalists who get hold of information off the record. We have very strict laws now in this country on national security grounds that it's a crime for a journalist to publish information. Yet this is the age-old ethical question: is it in the public interest? And that's a determination that every journalist is going to take. Assange, he's an unconventional journalist, but took the decision to publish and be damned, and he's paid a high price for it.
Yeah. Alexandra Marshall, thank you so much for joining tonight. I'm glad maybe you were the lucky charm that it took to fix our tech at our end, but I'm glad we could hear you without.
For you.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to. Sorry, say that again.
Follow me on Gab in case I get wiped out of Twitter, and I've also got my blog, which the link is on my Twitter account at the moment. So just in case I vanish.
Ellie, send me those details, and I'll update your author profile on the Good Source website so people can easily find you there, as well as those places. But Alexandra Marshall, thank you very much.
Have fun, kids. See you guys later.
Bye. And that was Ellie Melly. Let's bring back George, but we're also going to try again with Ray Radowski and just see if it wasn't him all along. It's probably going to work fine now. It was us. So here's George and Ray Radowski. Ray, give us a taste of those.
Echo. No, I'm just kidding. That's what it sounded like previously. Now it's echo. No, it's okay. What happened? I guess it's a tough act to follow now, but is there anything left to talk about?
Oh, look, there's lots of people who are tuning in halfway through, etc. So some people may not have even seen your bright face.
Can Ray give us his take, if you don't mind me interrupting, Dave?
Ray, come straight back to that. I just want to let everybody who's just joined the show, Ray is our North America expert, as you will tell from the accent. He's got a
North American accent.
What did I say?
North American accent.
I did say that? Oh, good.
No, I'm just kidding.
But a long career in journalism, one of the good guys, an actual professional, not besmirching the name, and now a professional consultant in communications and strategies as well. Wow.
Yeah, sorry, Dave. Ray, I'm really keen to get your take on what you think about this issue of voter fraud, and was the election stolen from Donald Trump?
Well, you got to look at the facts as we know them. And what we've seen, I think, throughout this whole situation has been irregularities that really can't be accounted for. You've got a lot of things leading up to this that we looked at with a really good degree of scrutiny. In fact, some of the things included lawsuits about what constituted mail-in ballots, who was eligible to be, voting by mail. And in some of the states that this occurred, the Constitution and laws were not followed. So there were a lot of procedures that weren't followed. We saw a lot of irregularities with the voting. We have these things that come out in terms of these voting systems and voting machines that don't actually count votes, but they calculate or tabulate votes. And then you've got a lot of things that just were never really fully explained. And then on top of all of that, the margins of victory in some of these states were so small that a few thousand votes in a couple of counties could have turned the whole thing around. So it does warrant further scrutiny, and that, I think, was where Trump was going with all this. And I think that by pushing through, he was exercising his right to do that. Now, would it have been any different if the situation had been reversed? I don't think so. In fact, leading up to the election, you saw Hillary Clinton and others saying that Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances. But even going beyond that, you start to see that what was put in place by various Democratic states were not necessarily what could be looked at in terms of a fingerprint that, aha, this is voter fraud, but the circumstances that would lead to the kind of chaos and uncertainty that unfolded around this. And I think that when you see, for example, in some states where when questions were raised in court, lawyers for the state of Georgia, for example, were pushing back and pushing to have data erased off the voting machines. Now, that always kind of struck me as odd, as why was that even the case? And then there were a number of hearings in various states that were run where affidavits were submitted and various experts were brought in to look at how these vote counts were held and were procedures followed. And it was never properly explained. So when you have that much doubt around a system, and then you've got this much rancor around it, I think that there's obviously going to be a lot of anger. And to simply just blow all of that off and say it was baseless, I think is ignoring a lot of the realities of the situation. Was there voter fraud? That has never really been proven because it's never been allowed to be heard in a court of law to determine what exactly happened, even though there are literally thousands of affidavits, we're told, which in fact are evidence.
And Ray, this is the point. I mean, people say it's baseless because about 50 or 60 courts supposedly heard legal suits brought by the Trump campaign. But the reality is none of those legal complaints were ever heard. They were dismissed on procedural grounds because of lack of standing or issues of timeliness. And so there's this big myth out there, and you read this in the Australian media, the courts threw it all out. It's all been debunked. But as you say, it hasn't. And yet we keep hearing over and over again it's baseless. And even to have a discussion like the one we're having now, you're seen as some sort of a conspiracy, weirdo or nut job. And this is an illegitimate conversation, and even more illegitimate now after that terrible riot on the 6th of January.
Or you could get your live stream taken off YouTube and Facebook if you'd say this sort of stuff. You run the real risk now.
Yeah. When you talk about this, there was now actual hearing into the evidence. There were a lot of these court cases that were dismissed. And it looked like in some cases, you talk about standing, which means that they didn't think that there was enough of a case, and then there was procedures, but there was no actual commission looking at the irregularities and questions surrounding this. And this goes back into what I think is interesting to hear from the inauguration, which we were talking about at the very beginning of this podcast, where, President Biden comes out and in the messaging, there's no reference at all to rebuilding trust, which from a communication standpoint, I would have thought would have been the most important aspect of that. There's this idea, and he brings it up at the very beginning. He says this, I can't, you've got to look at the exact words, but there's this vague idea of defining unity. Why even characterize it like that. If you're looking at trying to completely dispel all this, then come out and say, I think it's now time to rebuild trust in the process, trust in institutions, trust in government, trust in media, trust in technology. And there was nothing mentioned in that inaugural address about technology of any kind.
No,
There's
if anything,
nothing mentioned about. Sorry.
Well, he doubled down on this whole issue. He said this is a triumph of democracy. So it's like, shut up, democracy is won, the discussion's over. But I want to ask you, Ray, next week when this trial begins in the Senate as a result of the impeachment in the House of Representatives, is that the opportunity? Will there be a forum there for Trump's legal team to put some of this evidence out there and to have it discussed and looked at and debated properly and fairly?
Well, I mean, I haven't. Has that been confirmed? Is there a date set for this? Because presumably an impeachment is to remove someone from office. I mean, he's already left.
Yeah,
so
look, I'm just going on report. I saw today that Pelosi was going to run a Senate trial next week, and it is irregular in that Trump has left office. But I understand that their motivation is to ensure that he can never run again, that he loses the benefits of being a president, Secret Service, the ability to have briefings, talk to heads of state, that sort of thing, and most particularly so that he can't run again in 2024.
Yeah.
But this is exactly where Biden, as the president, and this kind of calls into question who's really running things in that administration, needs to come out and say, enough is enough. Like, seriously, enough is enough. Because these things start to go from the idea of pursuing justice to pursuing revenge, and then the excesses of this start to become the same types of abuse of power that they're accusing, the President Trump or former President Trump of. So the optics of this thing are going to blow up in their face. First of all, you've got a new administration that's trying to tackle COVID, figure out their policies in all these different countries, including China, Russia, Canada, which is the biggest trading partner, Mexico, and all of those issues associated with migration and illegal immigration. And they're going to have a Senate trial about an election that, all of the stuff really kind of has the potential for providing Trump with a platform to become a martyr. And, you look at the realities of the situation. He's, 74 years old. In 4 years, he'll be 78. And they're going to strip him of all these things. Like, at some point, the American people, and polls have indicated this, look at Trump as he leaves office, and his favorability, or the job approval rating, is 51%. Then you've got another situation where, the whole Biden administration, when you go to and I encourage you to do this, go to the YouTube White House channel, the official White House channel, and then look at the various content that has come out over the last 24 hours. So you see the inauguration, you see a few other photo ops with President Biden, and then you see the first briefing of the new press secretary, and then you look at the number of dislikes. There's 15,000 dislikes for the inauguration, and what is it, 1.7 thousand likes. Then you go to the first press briefing, and it's the same thing. It's a ridiculously high number of dislikes and a small number of likes. Now, if you're just going to use that, the comments are priceless as well. It's things like, and this guy won 80 million votes, and all these sorts of questions. So as someone who's got a message that, the word cloud, and Politico did a very good analysis of the inauguration, looked at sort of the different themes of it, did a word cloud comparison with Trump's 2017 inaugural address. The idea of unity comes through. How is this promoting unity? It's promoting revenge, and it's the kind of stuff that you see when coups take place and leaders are ejected from power. And the only thing that I can think of recently, like living here in Asia, where I am, 2014, there was a military coup in Thailand. And the first thing that the military government does is what? They remove him from power. Then they remove the government from power. They cut off the internet. They take control of the media, and then they put all opponents of the previous regime, which they call anti-coup coup activists on trial. And what are you seeing in this situation? You're seeing this, we are declaring war on domestic terrorism, and all these messages that are coming through that are completely at odds with the whole concept of unity. I mean, the messaging, clearly the inaugural address was put together by a committee, and that committee tried to remove anything that could possibly be seen as controversial. So you have this very nice speech, very well delivered, short, but when it comes to the actual calls to action, if you're a world leader and you're looking at this, there's no mention of Russia, there's no mention of China, there's no mention of Canada, biggest trading partner. They talk about renewing global alliances or something like that, but this is sort of vague reference. There's no sort of mention at all of technology. So now we're talking about the possibility of having a trial in the Senate for the previous administration. Like that, just the optics are bad, the strategy's bad. It's just going to rehash a lot of bad feelings, and at the whatever the outcome is, it's going to create more division.
It might, but what's stopping them? I mean, the Trump derangement syndrome there in Washington D.C. continues on. It's now on both sides of the ledger. The media have just absolutely done a number on him and his supporters. I mean, to where they're saying people that attend these MAGA rallies are domestic terrorists. I mean, that's actually being openly said in the mainstream of political discussion and media reporting. The question is, what is going to stop them? And I know that the polls say that most people see it as a bad thing, but actually to delegitimize him by impeaching him would be just the icing on the cake for the left, because he would never be able to come back. My understanding is that if the conviction is done by the Senate, not only is he stripped of the ability to run for any office in the country again, even a city councillor, I understand. He would also lose his Secret Service. His whole family would lose the Secret Service detail.
Really?
Pretty dangerous, given that they've had to have a flood of them attached to the family now because of death threats. Along with that, I'm not sure about this, but I have been told that he won't be able to make contact with any foreign leader. It may be a crime for him to make contact with foreign leaders. I'm not 100% sure about that part, but it strips him of the ability to have a presidential library. It basically strips him of every single thing. It's like scrubbing the history books. And so if the agenda over there, and it seems to be from the media and the left, but I repeat myself, to demonize Trump and his movement, that this would be the icing on the cake. So I'm not sure what's going to stop him.
Well, I think that what could stop them is that common sense prevails. And the other idea has to be that someone within the Biden administration has to have the common sense to say, you know what, our priority right now is reopening the economy. Our priority right now is reestablishing ties with these various countries that we think need to have a reboot, or whatever it was that he was talking about in his address. To continue with this is a really rocky road towards a destruction of, well, first of all, it criminalizes the presidency, because there's nothing that prevents this from ever happening again. And when you read, and it's really important to look at this, because the first indications of a kind of rift within the Republican Party and within, I think, Congress itself, is that when the Representative Liz Cheney, who represents the state of Wyoming and is the daughter of the former Vice President Dick Cheney, sided with the Democrats in the impeachment, it's very interesting to see the way in which the party responded. And they were saying that they condemned her for, and the reasons are really quite interesting, that this was a violation of due process, right? There was no trial. It was just like, we'll impeach because basically we don't like. Then there was this idea that the party was siding with extreme elements with the Democrats. So again, you're going against your party, you're going against due process. And you start to see the situation where both parties are going to destroy themselves from within because of the conflicts that going after Trump while he's left office would produce. And then, of course, there's that silly thing, the U.S. Constitution, which has, I don't think, really looks at trying somebody once they've left office. So it's going to open up a whole can of worms. It's going to completely delegitimize the opening days of the Biden administration. However, it could provide a very good distraction to do all sorts of things that would be pushed through legislatively without the same sort of scrutiny while the country's distracted with the previous administration. Yeah. But it reminds me like a lot of, and I recommend that anybody who hasn't seen this look it up, the 2006 film The Lives of Others, which documents. Have you seen that? Because you can find it on on the internet, but it's a dark film. But what's interesting about it is not so much the story, which is fascinating, but all the little details. And the story, The Lives of Others, talks about this, Stasi agent, this, spy in the former East Germany in the last days, like in 1984. And he's a committed socialist, and he's committed to spying, and he thinks that, but all the little details, like he's giving a lecture, and somebody raises a question like, is it humane to interrogate somebody like this? He goes and answers the question. There's a cutaway where he puts an X beside, the student's name. They're having lunch, and somebody makes a joke about Erich Honecker, who was the former East German president, and the Stasi agent, hears this and says, "Oh, go ahead, tell the story." And then the guy nervously tells the joke, and then there's this whole, "Oh, don't worry, everybody can laugh." Next, the guy's been sidelined to some position. That's the kind of future, this dystopian future, that you're looking at with cancel culture, with impeaching a very popular leader on spurious grounds, and then he brings out all these things about the election again, and then he's deplatformed. That, I think, is where the scariness comes. And in fact, in Australia, the acting prime minister condemned the Twitter ban. Strangely enough, if I'm not mistaken, the Sydney Morning Herald supported it. So there's certain things that come out of this that are just puzzling at times, because what we're seeing, and I think the biggest achievement of Trump that wasn't listed in that list of achievements, was tearing back the curtain in terms of where the power base in the U.S. really exists. And spoiler alert, it's not with elected politicians. It's with at this point, multimedia organizations and big tech that really kind of are able to control the politicians. And we see that with the president, and the whole idea of, well, if they can silence the president, which I think the previous guest talked about, then they can silence anyone. And you're seeing the outcry coming from former East Bloc countries. Poland has now got a law that will fine social media companies if they censor. You've got Angela Merkel, who's the outgoing German chancellor, but she grew up in the former East Germany, and they're looking at this and they're saying, we grew up with this kind of stuff, these show trials, and the spying, and the whole thing. Right. And the language that comes around this is fascinating. They don't call it censorship; they call it content moderation. It's not snitching on your neighbors. It's
Ray, this is
moderation. Right.
This is why I think it's really important, Ray, that we get to the bottom of the election results and the concerns over that, because Trump was impeached. Essentially, the charge is that he incited a riot in his speech on January 6. Now, we know from the timelines that even the New York Times has reported that the idiots and the rioters were breaching the barricades at the Capitol before Trump even started speaking. And it was a 45-minute walk from the Ellipse up to the Capitol. So the idea that he incited a mob there is plainly false, and he even said in his speech, march peacefully and patriotically. Now they're walking that back and saying, well, because he spent 2 months contesting the results of the election, that also incited this mob. And so the demonisation, the Stasi-like treatment of people that you have so eloquently described from The Lives of Others, that's begun in earnest now against conservatives in the US, against anyone who supports the Trump agenda. And by extension, it's blowing back on conservatives like here in Australia. George has been facing cancel culture, and Craig Kelly. So I think we've got to get to the bottom of resolving this contention over the election, and yet the suppression of CNN and the big tech companies and Joe Biden, everything has been done to try and shut down the conversation that created the anger and the unrest in the first place. Not condoning the violence, of course, but this conversation is now off limits because of the suppression job that's being done. And I think it's a real worry because that's feeding into the Stasi-like behaviour that now we're all copying as a result.
And it's
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Can I jump in and just say that it's this is almost like not just the Stasi from government, but the Stasi from major corporations as well, wanting to cancel everyone. I'm very, very worried about this and the direction this is going to go. And if you think that what was said before about us, the US and eventually Australia and Western democracies becoming like East Germany, where people are going to spy on you, if you don't think that's a reality, have a look at this video. This is a video that Don Winslow, an author over in the US, obviously a very big Trump hater. Have you got that video there, David? Hello, David? I think we might have just lost him.
No, I just took the sound out. Let's see if we can get this to work well. Where are we? Here we go.
I thought I was stuck there by myself for a moment.
No.
I'm going to carry the show on myself.
On or before January 20th, Donald Trump will no longer be the commander-in-chief. He will lose control of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Special Forces, and America's nuclear arsenal. On January 20th, Donald Trump will become the commander-in-chief of a different army. This army. The greatest threat facing America today comes from within. Radical extreme conservatives, also known as domestic terrorists. They are hidden among us, disguised behind regular jobs. They are your children's teachers. They work at supermarkets, malls, doctors' offices, and many are police officers and soldiers. For more than a decade, Donald Trump has spoken directly to white supremacists in their language.
Build that wall! Build that wall! Build that wall!
Pocahontas? Is it offensive? Oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
In the middle of a presidential debate, Donald Trump was asked to disavow white supremacy. He refused. Instead, he told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by.
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
They heard their leader. They even responded to him on Twitter, promising to stand by. And on January 6, 2021, Trump greenlit them. They suited up. They flew in. They took hotel rooms. They loaded their weapons, prepared their bombs. And they attacked with the intention of killing Nancy Pelosi and hanging Vice President Mike Pence.
They were vocally saying, "Where's the speaker? We know she has staff. They're here someplace. We're going to find them."
In the years ahead, Trump will lead his army of domestic terrorists. He will encourage and incite violence. He will play the role of arsonist and fireman. He will start a civil war and then say things were more peaceful when he was president. We have to fight back. In this new war, the battlefield has changes. Computers can be more valuable than guns. And this is what we need now more than ever, an army of citizen detectives. I'm proposing we form a citizen army. Our weapons will be computers and cell phones. We who are monitoring extremists on the internet and reporting their findings to authorities. Remember, before the Navy SEALs killed Osama bin Laden, he had to be found. He was found by a CIA analyst working on a computer thousands of miles away. It's up to you.
So there you go. I mean, there's such unity there. And I've got to say, what a whole lot of embellishment and selective editing of
wow, yeah,
all of the demonization of Trump and his supporters. But, this is the criminalization of politics, the criminalization of conservative politics. And that's what I'm very worried about. And it's going to be an agenda that's pushed by governments where there's left-wing governments in control. They'll accept opposition parties. You just got to be a bit more like them and less like what Donald Trump was, and less conservative. And then the agenda will go on in corporate world as well.
It's galling that they're calling us domestic terrorists. I stood and stared down the yawning jaws of the demonic hordes of Antifa outside a conservative event on private property in Melbourne. And I wasn't sure whether I should be thrilled by the Hollywood blockbuster unfolding before me, or horrified for the Baghdad war scene that was on the main streets of Melbourne. I mean, domestic terrorism was exactly what it is. They were trying to roll a bus with men, women, and children on it, and they were, throwing D-cell batteries over the fence, trying to hit the people that were coming in. And I mean, it was. One person was arrested, and a whole lot more were charged later with video evidence. But domestic terrorism.
Dave, I had my office bombed by a same-sex marriage. Actually bombed, and the Australian Federal Police said nothing to see here. So, and yet
no political motivation.
No. So it exists, but not in the way the left thinks.
Yeah, and now this reality. I mean, reminds me of how I teed off on Tuesday night about an abortionist describing Lila Rose as inciting violence, because you know what Lila Rose said that was encouraging everybody to go and attack abortionists? Abortion is violence. It's 100% accurate.
Yeah.
And these people are just turning reality upside down, inverting it, and as the Bible warns, calling evil good and calling good evil.
Well, George, you must be worried because you've been in the gun the last week or so, along with Michael McCormick, as Ray mentioned.
Yeah.
Tell us about your experience. What have you? We've only seen what we've seen in the media, but how's it affecting you? What else?
I've got very thick skin, Lyle, so it takes a lot to affect me. But I mean, that's it. I can say I'm not fat. It's just very, very thick skin. But anyway, the reality is that we've seen, it's a little bit B grade. There's a lot of Labor Party people and leftists in the media running around trying to Americanise Australian politics with the same sort of stuff we're seeing over in the US. It is a bit B grade and it's a bit basic, but it's the cancel culture. They're saying, I've seen headlines, Scott Morrison should shut down George Christensen and Craig Kelly, that Scott Morrison needs to sack George Christensen from a parliamentary committee. It's all the same sort of stuff. Like, why aren't they being reprimanded? Why isn't some sanction happening to them? So it's the creep, I guess, of this push to criminalise politics. And I think that's sadly where the left's going to take us. I hope that something is a roadblock. But Lyle, I know that you've read the book, Live Not by Lies, which pretty much talks about all that sort of East Germany, Stasi, the Soviet bloc, and what went on there, and how there's a lot of former Soviet bloc residents that are in the West now saying we can see the rise of what happened back in the home country. So I'm very worried about it, very, very worried, and I'm going to have to go in a minute or two, but can I just end that I think that the problem is that this big tech companies now control the public space. They control the new town square, and they're silencing people left, right, and centre. And that's why I started up that petition, stopcensorship.com.au. And I'm going to make it a mission to try and do something about this, because we can't have political discussion silenced in the way that private corporations are trying to do that here in this country or anywhere else in the West.
Yeah. Let's just wrap it up, George. I know I actually want everybody to go. 2 hours is a great show length. 30 seconds, Lyle, final thought of the evening.
I think we've got to toughen up, and we've got to become fighters. As Mark Latham said to me earlier this week in an interview that I did, this is a time for fighters, and we've got to take the threat seriously.
Yep. Watch that show, The Lyle Shelton Show, episode just out, just hours before this one was released. Go to the goodsource.news, and goodsource.news is the website. And watch that show. Great interview with Mark. We mentioned earlier in the night Matt Canavan's interview. He just showed brilliantly how to be unapologetic and unrepentant for being conservative and disagreeing with the leftist lying harlot media. Ray, last words from you tonight.
Well, I think it's really important to look at this and think about the messaging that's coming out of it, and to start to think about looking and using examples from the past to prevent any of these excesses from careening into a disaster, not only in the United States, but in other parts of the world as well. To heed the warnings, because again, you're in a situation that once that narrative is lost, and it's really hard to get back. Once people kind of look at this and either go along with it or just sort of shrug their shoulders, there's this compliance, and staying scared is part of all of that. And I think, keeping your head and your wits about you and getting the facts, I think, are critical in all of this.
Can we
Not
get a quick comment from?
It's not rushing to judgment.
Can we get a quick comment from Ray? You're in Hong Kong there, Ray. This conversation, I think, is very relevant there.
Yeah.
I know the time is short and Dave's wanting to wrap it up, but just quickly, what's the mood in Hong Kong like now that the CCP have cracked down on the democracy protests there?
Well, I think that you're seeing this from a lot of different sides. You've got a number of these people who were arrested who are making plans to leave. The government is, taking steps to prevent any of the kind of unrest that occurred in 2019. And I think that, it's kind of unprecedented in the sense that while China has taken a kind of hands-off approach, clearly they've started to move towards exerting a lot more control than they did to prevent that situation. But then on the other hand, you've got these sanctions that are put on Hong Kong, which are also puzzling in the sense that if you're trying to play up Hong Kong's unique position in the world, why are these governments employing sanctions that only force the city to move closer to China?
Yeah.
And that part, I think, hasn't really been fully explored. It's been like, okay, we get that there's going to be a little bit more control than there was when it comes to certain types of political activities. But what hasn't been really fully explored is what is the impact of all these, like sanctions and condemning Hong Kong and condemning the Hong Kong government. All it ends up doing is kind of confusing people here about, like, are we really on our own? And then there's only one place for Hong Kong to go, and that is closer to China. So I think that a lot of these strategies haven't really been thought out properly, and they seem to be kind of, knee-jerk in some ways, like, let's just condemn without looking a little bit more in terms of how can we engage better to preserve Hong Kong's unique place within China and within the world.
Yeah. The difference between North Korea and South Korea is politics. There's probably quite a few differences, but that's the stark difference between the industry, the prosperity, the flourishing, the peace, the liberty, the freedom that they have. And what we see is the purge happening right now of people who disagree with the dominant left narrative. There's only one sure way outside of a Christian faith that we can have confidence. Government is designed and intended by God to protect our freedoms, those natural, fundamental, inherent freedoms that are, equal to all men: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. These things we need a good government for. And that's why we actually do this show. That's why we need you informed, educated, and involved in politics. We need you to join the Liberal Party. And if you prefer a left of centre variety, then join that one. Not because you agree with it, not because you like it, but because you need to make it better. Because you need to make it better. The Liberal Party is not good enough. We need a lot more members to be pre-selecting and making secure the careers of people like George Christensen.
George is suggesting the National Party, Dave.
The National Party. The National Party in New South Wales is just about green intent.
That's true.
It definitely needs an influx of conservatives and Christians and right-thinking people. We are actually the solution. We can complain all day long about what's going on in government and society and education and the academy, but the buck stops with us. We have transaction politicians are a dime a dozen, and the way to manipulate them, or better said, the way to help support them doing the right thing is to stick and carrot. You're going to lose our support when you do the wrong thing, and we're going to be right behind you, cheering you on and giving you our votes, volunteer and donations if you do the right thing. If you be pro-life, if you be pro-freedom, if you be pro-small government and big liberty, then we will make sure you're in Parliament for as long as possible. And that's how we get our freedoms protected. And it does require some activity, and it does require a surrender of the comfort of leaving politics to others that we've enjoyed for decades past. And that time is past. And it's time for us, well and truly, to be up involved. It's not up to our pastors or somebody else. It's up to us. Final 30 seconds from you, George, and then let's say goodnight.
I think that you guys have said it all, but if I just refer to one very great quote that should give everyone courage, because this is a fight. And the quote was from Winston Churchill. Everyone knows it. Never give in. Never get in.
Yes.
Never, 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 never. And nothing great or small, large or petty. Never give in, except to convictions of honour and good sense. So let's all heed that. Let's fight on.
Well said, George.
Brilliant. Amen and amen. Good night, gentlemen. Good night, ladies, and those people who joined us previously. Thank you to viewers. And don't forget, 8 p.m. Daylight saving time Eastern, 7 p.m. Queensland time, Thursday night next week. And we will do it all again. And in the meantime, head to the Good Source website, subscribe to the email updates, tell us who you want to hear from and how often, and we will keep you connected with the Good Source. Good night.
Good night.